TopMedTalk. Excellent. Whoa, Happy New Year, folks. Happy New Year. Well, I'm Monty Mythen, Editor-in-Chief of TopMedTalk, coming to you live from the Association of Anaesthetists Winter Scientific Meeting here in the centre of London at the QE2 Centre. That's the Queen Elizabeth II Centre. Now, for those of you who don't know that and listening from around the world, that's right in the heart of London. It's right opposite our Houses of Parliament. It's right opposite Big Ben. You can't see it at the moment because it's covered in scaffolding. Or if you know that big wheel thing by the river, it's just near that bit of it. But it's right down in the centre of the whole action. Now, we're having a live dinner event. Yeah, those of you listened into some of these before, generously sponsored by GE Healthcare. So a quick round of applause and thank you to GE Healthcare for sponsoring tonight. Thank you very much indeed. And obviously in front of a feisty audience. We've got 3 guests tonight. We're going to be covering a broad range of subjects. We're going to be taking questions from the floor here as we go along. The whole evening is in 2 sections, about 30 minutes with 2 guests. Now, we're going to have a short break then, get the kettle on at home. Then we're going to have a 3rd guest join us. Then we're going to have a period of time to take questions from the floor and via Slido. So we're going to go straight into our first guest. That's Matt, Dr. Matt Wiles. Would you, Matt, introduce yourself, please? Where are you from? What are you doing here? I know you are, but...
Matt Wiles, I'm a neuroanaesthetist and neurointensivist based in the frozen north of Sheffield. And I'm here for the meeting, but also because I'm on the editorial board of the friendly white journal, Anaesthesia.
Anaesthesia, the friendly journal.
Very friendly.
And you had an editorial board meeting today, did you?
We did. Strategy, discussions, social media chat, Twitter. So it's great to carry on and come and, participate in a very 21st century exciting development.
When will the paper journal stop, Matt? No one's listening, so you're okay, you can tell me.
When the readership are happy. Apparently 81% still like a paper copy to come and land through their front door. But I suspect that will change with the new generation of people coming through.
The pressure's on.
I don't think for long. I think 5 years and we'll be electronic only, would be my guess.
From Sheffield. One of my daughters is at Sheffield, and she's having she absolutely loves it. And that dragged me up there to visit for the first time. I kind of get it now.
I think they have an incredible statistic of something like 85% of graduates who leave the university come back and stay there. They just stay forever.
That's what a great system. But who do you support in football?
Middlesbrough.
Where's that again?
That is the even more frozen northeast. So I was brought up in a land of chemicals, steelworks and pollution.
A true lad of the north. So, Matt... We lots of things we could talk about. I just want to ask you, I kind of teed you up a little bit this earlier, but we've been asking everyone about hot topics for 2020. Now, so far, I'm not going to give you the whole list, but we've had things like, I'm not going to ask you if you believe in these or don't believe in them, but if they're on your list, you can pick them out. Prehabilitation, oxygen levels like oxygen toxicity, whether we're giving out too many opiates, artificial intelligence and closed loops. Do you think any of those would be on your list? We're not looking for the ones you don't like. Is any of them on your list? And do you have any to add?
I think hyperoxia, particularly to neuroanaesthetists. We've seen the association with hyperoxia and worsening mortality in stroke. And whether that's correlation or causation, we don't know. I think at a personal level, it's a drug. As anaesthetists, we're very bad at titrating. We sort of try to individualise care a lot. But a lot of people just run all the patients on 50% for as long as it takes because that's easy. And don't necessarily think of it as a drug that will have benefits, but also possibly complications.
Any of those other ones on your list? So oxygen's on the list, I'm taking. Any of the others? And if not, give us 2 others.
I still do some preoperative assessments, so rehabilitation, surgery schools, fitness for surgery. No doubt it's a benefit in terms of... duration of stay, patient-centred outcomes, patient experience is much better. What I'd add, following on from conversations about e-journals, would be sustainability in healthcare and the environmental impact of what we do as clinicians, the choices we make, the drugs we use. The NHS within the UK uses an awful lot of carbon. Our carbon footprint is huge.
Yes.
And even in terms of education, I mean, perhaps what we're doing now and sharing thoughts throughout the world rather than flying over there may well become a model that becomes ever more common.
Well, we fly around a lot to do this, but what we're trying to do, and we're trying to do it less and less, is to allow a few people to get together so tens of thousands can stay at home or near home. Now, we still need to socialise as well, though, don't we? But you can still get together and listen in or watch in.
Well, we do, and so certainly even within Sheffield, we've periscoped conferences within a small group of people and had the same conversations and discussions, but without the travel and without the cost to our employers, but also without the inconvenience, because up and down to London in a day, particularly with our rail network, can be challenging.
So environmental opportunities. I think one of my takeaways from last year, we were lucky, I know this is an area that you're very interested in, which is, I think, depth of anaesthesia. We were lucky enough to be at the anesthesiology, the big American meeting, just around the time that the Balanced Anaesthesia trial was released. So we got to interview Tim Short and Kate Leslie, hot off the press. And they sat down and they explained the results of this great big trial, this international effort, looking at 2 different depths of anaesthesia. And the sort of possible damp squib result, you could argue, was there was no difference between the 2 groups. But I think it's a very, very positive result. It says deeper or lighter anaesthesia seem equally safe. But the lighter anaesthesia, guided by depth of anaesthesia, used far fewer of the gases. Isn't that a big environmental opportunity?
Certainly. I mean, and locally, desflurane is getting absolutely roasted. And if you go into social media, its carbon equivalent footprint and how long it lasts in the environment is not insignificant. And the idea of doing anything that can help reduce an environmental agent, but also an agent that ultimately we sort of often forget this is a drug we don't really fundamentally understand how it works. So the idea of giving less rather than more of what you need would seem to be sensible.
So if we can segment that up, if people want to listen to the podcast of the results, go into TopMedTalk, put in Timothy Short or Balanced Anaesthesia, for example, you can listen to their version of what their trial showed in the detail. The links to the papers are in the show notes. But you've had a chance to, I think, look at it in detail. Your executive summary of what you thought it showed and what the takeaways were?
Yeah, I thought it was a very positive study.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with, on the face of it, a negative study. And I think the authors in particular should be congratulated for how they wrote it up and how the journal handled it. They didn't try to make it what it wasn't. And wearing my editorial hat, that's something we see a lot.
Yes.
Just because you don't hit your primary outcome measure doesn't mean there's not value in there. 73 countries, over nearly 7,000 patients. And Gary Mills, who worked in Sheffield, was also one of the authorship group. And as a result, we recruited quite a lot. So I know I contributed 4 patients myself to this study.
And a whole year?
It'd be because
back off stage, calm down, buddy. Not 4 patients in a whole. I'm only joking. Go on.
4 patients out of 6,000. I'm amazed I wasn't one of the named authors. It seems so unfair. A very interesting population. Yeah. Patients we worry about for all the things you mentioned, prehabilitation and stuff, aged over 60, ASA 3 or 4, having major surgery. And what a really good primary outcome measure they took. 1 year mortality.
Yes.
A long-term patient-centred, if I'm going to go through this surgery, what are my chances of having a really important outcome at 1 year? And there was no difference. 1 year mortality, roughly 7% in both groups.
So deeper anaesthesia doesn't appear to be harmful long-term, and lighter anaesthesia, carefully titrated with the monitors, was equally as safe. Is that right?
And one of the positives takeaway was the awareness rate.
Yes.
1 patient in the population, even though around 40% of the patients were run at an end tidal level of less than 0.7 of a MAC.
Right.
So that was very reassuring for the use of depth of anaesthesia as a guide, but also reassures people that actually you can run a range of end tidal concentrations without concerns. And I think uniquely to that paper, they looked at age-adjusted MACs and also adjusted for the use of nitrous and other things, which many of the earlier works that suggested the benefit, Dan Slessor's work with the triple low, hadn't accounted for that. And when you look at around that 0.7, 0.8 of a MAC, there's actually a linear relationship for age if you look at the MAC age-adjusted equivalent charts. So actually it can make quite important differences. So from that point of view, it was really reassuring. Speaking as someone who actually put patients through it, it was difficult to keep patients to that tight level of control, and that's where the study fell down. So ultimately it was underpowered for all the outcomes. Mortality was slightly better than they expected, but also it was very hard to maintain patients within 5 absolute BIS units. And I certainly struggled. I mean, I use predominantly TEVA for my neuro. I'm happy, I'm confident, I believe the number that BIS has. But the lowest I had a patient running on that to maintain the BIS of 50 with an epidural in for a major hip revision. They had an end-tidal CEVO of 0.3.
Wow.
Which, unless you were fully convinced that this worked, but then...
Were you nervous?
A bigger problem then is if the patient moves a bit, or the surgeon moves it, you haven't got any dampening of any other adrenergic response. So then you get a big spike in bit, huge spike in blood pressure, and it becomes a really difficult anaesthetic to manage. So I understand why they lost a huge number of patients. Almost 3,000 patients were lost due to overlap between the groups.
So we'll come back to this later on, and this has been a recurring theme. On our list of hot tops tips for 2020 is closed or open loop systems. So in other words, if you let your depth of anaesthesia monitor talk to your anaesthesia vaporizer with a computer assist in between, you'd still be in charge. You'd be in control of the joystick. You'd be flying the plane, if you see what I mean. But they'd be able to keep it there. The computer would keep it there much better than you could keep it there. Do you accept that?
Not with BIS.
Okay.
That polarises a lot of people, particularly in the UK. Yep. People with, is it a random number generator or is it a really useful tool? It is a monitor.
Right.
It is prone to all the weaknesses and deficiencies of any other monitor we use. Pulse oximetry, ECG, non-invasive blood pressures. We all know in certain situations they are less reliable or sometimes hopeless. It doesn't stop us using them, but it's the ability to process it.
Weren't you using it and you adjusting the vapour to try and keep it in a particular range?
I was, but BIS is a number that is generated via an uncertain algorithm, which is one of the reasons people don't like the black box, because we don't really know where the number's coming from. But also it's a 45 to 55 second average bit.
Right.
So it tells me how things were, similar to saturations.
Can't you program that into the computer, though?
And because of the process...
you seem to be suggesting you're better at this than a computer would be.
I'm suggesting in terms of...
I don't doubt you are, but everyone's not as good as you.
I think in terms of the ability to look at the whole picture, it's like any number you get.
Yeah,
that heart rate, that saturations, actually you need to look at the whole patient and contextualise it. And what I've certainly seen with BIS is there are a number of unique procedures or stimulus that cause abnormalities. EMG being a major factor, and we see this on critical care a lot, but also things when it detects a frequency from direct pressure. Surgeons are often clumsy with their hands. They don't tend to worry about pressing on patients, particularly their head bits. But frequency of drills. So I do a lot of pituitary surgery. The frequency of the drill that vibrates up the nose confuses the BIS, and it thinks it's EMG, and it pushes up my number.
Fly-by-wire, which is what I've been learning about over Christmas. I had enough time to listen to the original Apollo missions and got my head around the difference between closed loops and open loops and fly-by-wire. You're still flying the plane if you let the computers help. It's just you said at the beginning it was really, really hard to keep your trim, if you see what I mean. Don't you think the computer could help in that little space there just to help your joystick adjustment?
With TIVA...
It sounds like I'm really plugging something that someone's going to be selling next year. This is all pie in the sky, by the way. I think there's some research work in this space. But
I think with TIVA you can.
Yeah.
I think, with a TIVA anaesthetic, you tell me to aim for a number, and I will hit that relatively accurately within a very small degree of variance. With volatile, which was the point of the Ballast study, at low flows, I've either got to... we can wave the environmental flag again and say I either have it at very high flows, but may give a very expensive anaesthetic, but it lets me adjust the end tidal very, very rapidly. Gotcha. I don't think a computer can do that unless it can adjust the flows. I think you'd end up using a lot of volatile anaesthetic. TIVA in steady state, once you hit that sweet spot, the variation is actually very small. So I would make my neuro days a lot easier if I just had a computer. It was just taking things up and down gently and running with it. Volatile, I think it's going to challenge. Gotcha.
So it's the choice of agent that made it harder,
I think so.
etc. So we'll come to some Slido questions in a second, and we'll bring our next guest up in a moment. But before we do that, is there anything else you want us to take away from the Balanced study? I know there's a whole load of stuff in there. Balanced Anaesthesia study, I should say.
I think it sort of raised the flag again about people who don't see the value in depth of anaesthesia monitoring will use this as something else to say there is no benefit.
Why would they see it that way, Rand? Because you can give a lot more gas and drug than you need and the outcomes are okay. I was taken by the fact I can give as little as possible, and that's a good thing, isn't it?
People would say that if major outcomes, complications and mortality were the same, if you're looking at an extra cost of maybe about £10 a patient, they would argue that there's a cost effect of that without influencing duration of stay or critical care admission or bid things. Part of it comes down to the problems with doing any studies with this, and also the misnomer. It's not a depth of anaesthesia.
Okay.
They're not depth of anaesthesia monitor. They are processed EEG monitors that produce a number that predicts probability of recall. So
Gotcha.
The big thing to take away from that is, do you know what? It predicted probability of recall really well, in that the awareness rate was far lower than you'd expect from other population studies, 1 in 7,000. It does what it's supposed to do. We've taken that number and then imagined that it falls into some sort of linear response, and that reflects a depth of anaesthesia, and a bit of 60 is a much lighter anaesthetic than a bit of 30. We don't actually know that. And if there was a really big difference at that sort of level of anaesthesia, we would see that in other areas. Why isn't regional anaesthesia so much better for complications than avoiding all these agents? And yet we've looked at that in multiple areas. Neck of femur, carotid endarterectomies. We haven't been able to show that regional anaesthesia per se, so avoiding all these potentially toxic agents and not affecting the brain or in any way, is any better. So I think the idea of just taking this single isolated process EEG effect and saying that's a target is probably a mistake, and we're trying to extrapolate the process EEG to do something it was never designed to do.
So I'm going to call up our next guest, and while Marcus settles in, I'm just going to take a few quick fire questions. From Slider, how is depth of anaesthesia monitoring changing?
If I were to make one prediction for the next 10 years, I would say that volatile anaesthesia is going to disappear in the developed world.
Oh, wow. There we go.
There you go. That's my prediction for two reasons. I think the major driver will be environmental effects, because TIVA is ultimately cleaner from an environmental point of view. And I think if the work on oncological outcomes that came from Tim Wigmore at the Marsden, if those prospective RCTs do come to pass and there is any signal at all that there's a difference in terms of tumour recurrence, that will be the death knell for volatile anaesthesia. And on the back of that, we're going to, I think very quickly, we could have a whole generation of anaesthetists who may have not used TIVA since they were trainees, of suddenly almost being nudged very strongly in that direction. And certainly I've got surgical colleagues who are now requesting onco-anaesthesia.
Oh, there we go.
And I say, what is that?
Anti-onco-anaesthesia, maybe, isn't it?
And I think on the basis of that, I think the only way to get people through that learning curve will be with some reassurance of with depth of anaesthesia monitoring. So I expect it to become as commonplace as seeing your trainer force stimulator or your pulse oximeter.
So, up-down answer, and then we'll move on. Awareness during anaesthesia increasing or decreasing, do you think?
Decreasing.
Excellent. I hope that's true. Marcus, who are you and what are you doing here?
Hi, I'm Marcus.
It's great to see you again, Marcus.
Really nice to see you too. Thanks for the invitation. I'm an intensive care consultant and anaesthetist at Frimley Park, and I'm the co-chair of the FICE committee, the Intensive Care Society's focused ultrasound for intensive care. And we, along with very many fantastic colleagues, helped set up some ultrasound training for the UK. Excellent.
So you're an ultrasound. What do you make about what you've just been hearing? We'll come back to a bit more about you.
It's fascinating. It resonated for me because I use BIS for my TIVA anaesthetics, and I do a lot of colorectal stuff for cancer, and I think it's great. Really helps me to do my job.
Have you heard much about the balanced anaesthesia study, either reading it directly or chatter in bars or whatever?
I haven't actually. I'm sorry to say I haven't. No.
There's one argument that there's not a whole load to hear. There's another argument there's a huge amount to take away from. I'm sure you will hear quite a lot about it. There'll be quite a lot of discussion. Yeah. Do you think it's going to go the way that is predicted by Matt?
Yes, I do. I think it's popular. Yes,
I do.
You're very compelling argument.
Hot Topics 2020. We gave you prehab, the oxygen, the opiates, the AI, and closed and open loops. Do you want to pick any of those? Do you want to add any to that? AI
for sure. Sure, particularly the one I work in. I think it's going to be a big thing in the next year and the next 10 years. I'd also add, because I work in a district general, not like you in a tertiary centre, that a big thing for us this year is going to be decentralisation of paediatric intensive care. That's going to be that's going to be a big subject for us.
Is that happening at scale and pace?
It's not, but the papers have come out. The committee, the Pediatric Intensive Care Society, have released their wishes for us to retrieve quite a lot of patients back into adult services, because they just can't cope with the flow, particularly at high periods of demand.
Because when I was a young doctor, it's a long time ago now, you took people into intensive care irrespective of their size and age.
Yeah.
And then they sort of said, well, the very, very small ones, the ones that seem to behave quite differently, maybe under 2, for example, you ought to send to some more specialist centres.
Yeah.
But once they get to a sort of 8, 9, 10, we foolishly thought they were like small, big people.
Yeah.
And we would just look after them.
Yeah.
And then we were told we shouldn't do that. You're saying it's swinging back.
They are, I think, small adults. I think we can do that. But I think in my lifetime, it's all been done in paediatric intensive care centres. So our job is to stabilise, and then they come and retrieve and take them away. And I've worked in those centres before I became a consultant where I work at the moment. Yep. And I appreciate both sides of that argument. For instance, children who have seizures, most of them that get retrieved are woken up immediately at the other end. And, I think patients and children, families want to stay nearer to their homes, and I think that's and there is a strict logistical problem at the moment, particularly in the winter periods, for accommodating them in PICUs. So many of us are encouraged to extubate them on location back at the hospitals we're in, and I think we're going to see a big trend towards particularly level 2 management in the region.
Interesting. And we'll get on to discussions about transfers later on. I presume as part of that, once you sort of push things out and do as much as you can, you're going to increase the need for specialist referral when it doesn't quite go according to plan.
Absolutely.
But you're going to do it really well because you're planning for it.
Yeah, and absolutely there's going to be level 2 units within regions, so they're not going to be in the PICU necessarily, they're going to be in a district general maybe, and there's the whole complexity of moving sick level 2 children amongst the region, and that's a problem I haven't quite fully solved yet.
Well, in London we have had for quite a long time a highly specialist retrieval to centre for paediatrics, but it's probably going to need to increase in its numbers, and everyone's going to need to engage in the opportunity. Now, do you know that's happening, or is that your prediction for 2020?
Prediction? I know that is happening. That's the will.
Yes, that's a strong prediction.
That's the will.
I thought when I looked on Paddy Power earlier, they won't give you odds on it, so you know. Have you got a prediction we don't know will happen necessarily? What's your sort of guess?
Well,
anything hot? Do you think?
I've also. I mean,
where do you stand on prehab? Do you think that's hot?
Prehab? Yes, I do. Yeah, I've met people who are very passionate about that. It's not something I know about very much at the moment, but Any
other sexy topics?
What do you think?
Well, we've given you the prehab, you've taken the AI and the closed loops, and you've given us paediatric intensive care, so you maybe got the 3.
Well, I mean, stuff I know from ultrasounds happening, is that something I can bring in?
We brought you up here specifically to discuss ultrasound. So luckily, because we spoke to you just over a year ago here.
Yes,
you were walking past, you said hello.
Great. I came to say hi and you put the cans on.
And we recorded a fantastic interview with Desiree Chappell. You told us all about ultrasound and we went away believing it. So I think your stance
there is huge things happening, and I think for me the summary is that everybody's coming together. There's never been a stronger time where cardiology, anaesthesia, medicine are coming together for the benefit of patients around ultrasound. So there's huge collaboration going on behind the scenes, and that will be the defining moment for us in 2020.
Okay, so let's go back through this. So this is use of ultrasound technology at the bedside, which is now much more readily available.
Yeah.
And seems like you can put it almost anywhere. Yep. Inside and without the law, there are multiple different places you can put the probe. Yeah. And it seems now as though the very young doctors are learning to do ultrasound. Is it gone back into medical school yet? I know the sort of people around that sort of year 1, year 2 are going on courses now.
I wish it was.
But it's not quite there, is it?
No, and it's taking them time to catch up. It is in the States. There are some centres that do this routinely, but I think we're not quite there yet. I wish we were, because I think it's much more effective than clinical examination with a stethoscope. We should never remove the stethoscope, but in terms of the things that matter to me in the ICU, you can pick them up with ultrasound very, very readily.
Okay. No one's listening. Do you still actually use a stethoscope?
Mine is hanging in my locker. It's got dust on it.
Right. So you said we shouldn't get rid of the stethoscope. That was just a platitude, wasn't it?
You asked me off record, right?
Yeah.
This isn't going out worldwide, right?
No. Okay. But you're saying you can do it all with
I work in a team with auscultation in the team members, but
team auscultator.
Yes. Yeah. Ultrasound brings you a huge amount. And there's much of what we're looking for that you just can't detect clinically. Do you want me to list a few things?
Yeah, we'll do in a second, but I'm coming towards the end of my clinical career, possibly in intensive care.
Yeah.
Should I be allowed back in to do another shift if I can't do ultrasound? I mean, that sort of happened in let's be honest.
Yeah.
That sort of happened in cardiac. It got to a stage with transesophageal echocardiography where you had to either join in or get out.
I would say your clinical skills are very good, Monty, and I think using your...
You haven't worked with me for a long time. But
the thing is, chest x-ray, auscultation, all these things have
Should I put it, if I want to stay for another few years in ITU, should I put it on my list of skills to acquire and take much
What are you
more
looking
seriously?
for? What are you worried about? I want to
do the best possible job I can do.
Because I think you'll be a very good clinician, but you'll be average next to someone with ultrasound. Because people with ultrasound will pick up things that you haven't picked up.
Now you got my attention. Give me some examples. Give me a working example.
Okay, so the iller you get, the more your physiology changes in ways that make it much, much less likely the signs are going to be sensitive and specific. Example, somebody comes in with a long history of breathlessness, ankle swelling, crackles at the lung bases. In the outpatient setting, they've probably got heart failure. But once you get critical illness, you just can't tell. And we know that because sensitivity, specificity, and predictive value for these things are very, very low. For instance, looking for low ejection fraction or left ventricular impairment, there are signs you can look at that might pick up chronic heart failure, but acute heart failure, they're very, very few. And actually, there's very few signs that can rule it out. In fact, if you don't do a Valsalva maneuver, which is something we don't do very much, the evidence stands for Valsalva, but other than that, there are no signs that can pick out low ejection fraction. So we rely on our kind of clinical patterns and our gestalt, but the patient I just mentioned, ankle edema, crackles, etc. So many times I've looked with ultrasound, and my colleagues will back this up, that you look and think, I'm expecting to see heart failure, and I see a heart that's underfilled with, small vessels, small heart. This person needs volume. And I think that's the big win. There are many others.
But you have to, I'm presuming like everything else we do, you put it in the big picture.
Yeah.
You don't become obsessed with the ultrasound.
Of course. No. You have to, it's
history,
all about
examination, put it in context.
So I really think history is the biggest win, I think, but most of our patients can't give big histories. Some of them can't speak at all. You meet them shocked, they're semi-conscious, and you don't have that. So, you've got ancillary tests, which we know aren't perfect. Chest x-rays aren't very sensitive. Lung ultrasound is much more effective for picking up the important wins.
So compelling, passionate argument.
Yeah.
Okay, two quick things. We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Two quick things. Where's the evidence and do we need it?
So the evidence is it can be done. The evidence is that sensitivity and specificity are good for picking up a lot of what we're looking for. There's evidence to show consistently the impact is around 50%. So, doing ultrasound is going to change what you were thinking or doing. So I think those are beyond doubt. The outcome data is limited. There are some single-center studies.
Does that matter?
Well, I don't think you're ever going to get a randomized control trial in this area that's going to prove it. And I don't think it matters. And partly because, it's hard to get equipoise, because if you're good enough to deliver it, you probably believe it's a good thing. I think trying to, need huge studies to make that kind of show benefit. And also interoperator variability is an issue. So, do you trust EM doctors? Do you trust intensive care doctors? And I think it's such a complex study to do. I'm not sure it's going to happen. And I think we just look to transesophageal echo and tell me how many randomized controlled trials, were there before we implemented that as a routine part of perioperative care for cardiac patients.
Well, we're lucky enough to have one of the people in the audience who started the
Saul.
whole journey, but we'll bring him in after the break. We'll bring in Dr. Saul Aronson, one of our US anchors for TopMedTalk, and a legend in this field, is here to put us straight after the break. Before we take a short break and bring in our third guest, very briefly, what are the recent developments in ICU ultrasound to monitor cardiac output using ultrasound is one of our Slido questions.
Well, that is an area I'm really interested in. I think so. To date, we've had a situation where there's very basic ultrasound, which FICE and FEEL and focus and is the area, and then there's advanced ultrasound, which is a kind of master's level 2+ year endeavour to kind of get board certification, and there should be nothing in the middle. And I think personally it's a continuum of learning. And with people who do focused basic echo need to develop. And I think there is some ground just in the middle, and cardiac output is definitely one of them. It won't replace continuous monitoring, because echo is a contiguous tool. It's not something we would do continuously. But in environments like the emergency department or in the unit when you just brought them in, looking for signs of low stroke volume is an easy win with echo. Definitely.
I've seen some incredible pictures of some of the stuff that's coming over the horizon, like 3D echo and things. Is that's all happening? Is it?
So 3D echo is still a research tool, and it's difficult. You still need good 2D windows to get good 3D. So I'm not sure. I think strain and stuff is coming on the horizon for sure. And I think for us, we're looking at developing focused TOE as something on the near horizon, which is going to be exciting.
TEE for those listening in the rest of the world. Yeah. And transesophageal echo spelt the right way or the wrong way. Is that right? You can choose which one's right and which one's wrong.
So small training systems are picked up around the world, and I think that's right. It's a good thing for us to do in certain patients.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for teeing us up for the conversation after the break. We're going to take a short break now. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Monty.
Desiree Chappell here. Just a quick reminder, subscribe to TopMedTalk. We're a daily source of news and conversation focused on perioperative care. We bring you all the latest talk from all the major conferences in the perioperative space. We can also be found on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and we now have a free mailing list with special offers and additional goodies for subscribers. Go check us out at TopMedTalk.com. That's www.topmedtalk.com.